And this doesn't mean that your super ego and your anger are fighting, because your anger is saying, get up, go, fight, Andy, that, and start remembering you. Well, all the resentments, the memories of the outbreaks, but your super ego, that is your rules. I shouldn't whisper to myself, I shouldn't do because this is bad, this is impulsive, etc., etc. No, oh.
Do you understand and say, don't you know that the last time I reacted like that, I complicated everything.
So,
I complicated everything. Then I was going to say another no louder, but say, you don't know I complicated everything, then I complicated everything, and now let's see nothing. I already complicated it. I already learned that by acting like this, I complicated everything for her. So better. I'm not going to say no. It's just that, of course, and why they make me angry and how I behave. That's a justification, but it's like that. I already know that it went wrong for me because I reacted like that, and now it works for you because you take it, you go and you say, you know what, or I'm not going to talk anymore, I'm not going to control myself, let's change the subject or something. But
and
I don't want to explode it.
you said something very good right now. When the superego is abused, justification is created, but not only justification in reason, because people create justification. It is because they do not want to be responsible for their actions, their impulses, their feelings. So when there is no that responsibility, there are two things: either everyone is responsible or you become a victim. So when these things happen, they are not healthy. Why? Because imagine a person who happens many times, not that this happened to me and that's why I can't do anything. In other words, from there, your level of confidence, you yourself minimize it and know. And how can you be competent if you don't have a little self-confidence at the beginning? So it's very dangerous when one hears a person talking that everyone is responsible, because he's not focusing on his superhero and he's focusing on what he doesn't control, which is the external world, which he doesn't have, which one can't decide.
Of course, let's see. For that, you have to understand that it is a personal decision to make yourself responsible for if you do not control these primitive instincts. Are you going to be bad, or are you going to generate conflicts? So you have to take responsibility for what's going to happen if you don't control it like that. And for this, also know that you cannot, these thoughts or these primitive attitudes, these primitive behaviors are not healthy and do not have to be hidden. If not, we have to improve, not improve it, but rather understand that if this happens, it will have an impact or damage it will generate.
Damage, there is retaliation, of course.
Retaliation, whether by others or from situations, is something unavoidable in such scenarios. I'm going to generate another conflict.
Exactly, you are going to not just another conflict, but people lose confidence in you, they lose faith in you, they are not going to feel safe because they see and notice the emotional instability, the fact that, for example, there is too much criticism, but there is no center of criticism towards one itself to be able. Because, for example, when these no one occur, you must always evaluate what is more important, because that also happens. That happens a lot with the ego and the id. Not that, let's say, someone has a partner, and the partner, let's say the person you choose does 80% of things right, but he has that 20% wrong. But imagine, no, many relationships have problems because they put everything into it. They begin to create many rules in superego in that 20%. That is, they focus on that 20%. And that makes him react impulsively every time they do something that his superego begins to justify. But here comes the detail, and this is where one must raise awareness beyond the subconscious. And the ego's decision is whether I have 80% here and in that good thing, not because I want my superego to make that person change if that person does not want to change, because then here comes the development of the ego. That is, the ego is me. I think it's much more important than the two of them, because the other two are always fighting. Is the ego the center of intelligence, moral, ethical, convincing, and emotional? No, because there you have to think, right? Well, if that person doesn't want to change, suppose then what should change? It's me. So I must create a rule so that it doesn't bother me anymore. It's not that I have 80%. Why am I going to change that 80% for 20? So here comes the detail, because for example, when you do that and the other person no longer feels that weight that you want to bring towards them, that is going to generate something in that person that can say, you know what, I see it doesn't bother you, but maybe I should change that.
But what about the ego itself? Like you said in the intelligence center. But if your superego does not generate this rule, neither does your ego. He's not going to act like that. And you act in a balanced way when you have a superego formed according to a consciousness, a behavior. Let's say it's healthy. Of course, you don't see the problem, but you see a solution, then the LA, because the solution there is, you know that, but it has 80%. Well, what do I want that person to be 100% for? I am forcing her, and the other is not going to let herself be imposed. Then it generates conflict. So what's the point of creating conflict if you're good at this?
So it's like someone gives you a car from the year David and has a door that is scratched, a single door on the entire car. The whole car is perfect, 0 miles, but one thing is too bad.
And you're angry about that?
Exactly why?
Do you think the car won't work because exactly?
And every time you see the car, don't you see?
All the tires that are 20 in have new rims. The engine is new, it is 0 km, leather seats, it smells new. But your focus is on that small defect detail. But here is where the consciousness must develop well, because the superego is the rules, not in the consciousness is the perspective beyond you. With that, he lets you evaluate. So the ego has that extra information. What are the perspectives beyond me? Apart from this debate that I have,
we're engaging deeply with curiosity and exploring. It's captivating yet also raises questions. How did you get these three? This conversation evolves into discovery, putting them from different angles. How's primitive? Let's say the one with which he controls the primitive, that if I don't control well, my primitive controls me, because I create the rules so that the primitive continues to prevail. And I make those rules, so I create a superego that conflicts with my ego. So if I go, it's there. Well cemented, that is well strengthened. Can I generate the rule to change my superego?
That's right, perfect. No, you couldn't have said it better. The advantage that the ego has is that all this information reaches it. So this is where psychological discernment training comes in. Why? Because you already have these. From a conflictive point of view, no, but here it comes as ego. Well, what exists outside of me for me to now fully discern all the information I have to make a decision from there? So, for example, unfortunately, no, we don't have in our schools an emotional psychological education that helps us put ourselves in other people's shoes, that helps us think beyond our own perspective of how we feel. Educational systems might falter not due to blame, but oversight in supporting broader emotional awareness. It's no one's fault.
Is it because we don't get used to asking for help and think we are self-sufficient?
Exactly what you said clearly, and that is self-sufficiency comes when even when you make mistakes, you understand your value in the mistake, but you rectify it more, not justify it. For example, you're a chemist. I imagine David doing all your chemistry tests. I mean, how many times do you not make mistakes to reach a good result?
As discussed in numerous podcasts, there are often countless adjustments to be made over time, quantitatively through modifications, such as altering the sequence of application. You discern errors time and again, actively seeking flaws to understand and address them. You know there's going to be a mistake, it's not going to come out. And sometimes I do. I did it that way because I wanted to know the mistake.
What did they lead to?
What I knew was going to go wrong, but knowing the error, that is, knowing that changing the order was actually going to generate an error, but what error was it going to lead to?
Absolutely, step by step.
Why so? Understanding matters because at the moment, Another makes the same mistake, you explain. It is because you didn't do this right, you altered this because that's the way to learn, you altered this, you definitely put it in this order, and that's why it didn't come out for you. Then there it would come. It is the formation of consciousness and learning to say, I'm not doing well because I wanted to change. So let's step back and do it right. Then this is also brought to practical life, what we are talking about.
That's absolutely correct. And when you discuss chemistry in experimental chemical processes aimed at achieving results, it's remarkably akin to what we're exploring currently in the psychological realm, such as this example. Experience is a perspective that needs your consciousness. For example, knowing, socializing with other consciousnesses is another perception, another perspective. But this is where, for example, we have to understand that today, especially today, that we live in an age where everything is digital and virtual, not that our brains. They are not like computers that, for example, if you connect one computer to another, it communicates. In other words, those two consciousnesses are programmed together. We, for example, neither you nor I know what we are thinking because there is no such connection. So communication beyond the superego, the ego, and the IT is, although and is so important because it is always said, sometimes it is not the substance but the form. No, so the way that communication extends to another person is just as important as is the decision you make to do good because you want to do good but you communicate it in a bad way. In other words, what was it worth to you to have had all that reasoning for later as someone who claims to be aggressive in your message? What about you? Your communication didn't arrive. It was a failure. So this is where Freud talks about personality, not that, for example, the ego must also consider the form of communication. Yes, of course, because if you don't fail, what was the point of doing all that assembly to not put the wheels on or not put the engine on the car?
Or lacking fuel.
Don't put gas in it exactly. So communication is very important, and also identifying when another person is agitated or angry. Don't catch up because that must also be part of our superego. Create that rule that when someone is upset, sad, or crying, for example, if you see someone crying, you're not going to yell at them, right?
Of course, the communication does not arrive.
Sure, but if, for example, when one sees someone upset, one gets upset, that is a primitive instinct to catch up with aggressiveness. But when one sees a sad person, when one sees a vulnerable person, he becomes this empath. He doesn't want to be their help. So this is where we also have to discern that when a person is upset, the work of one, the rule that one has to establish is we are going to create a rule where I can be useful, not to not cause more anger, not to bring anger, reduce it, but to not cause more anger.
Sure, why? Because I create more conflict.
Exactly. And then there comes philosophy, peace. Your peace of mind should not have a price. So sometimes we always play with that price. No, but it's logical because we are human beings. We're sorry? No, I'm not saying he.
Power of courage.
Exactly clear. And we talk about human value.
Help us continue to embrace these human experiences and explore more about ourselves and others by just subscribing. If you like our content, definitely like, comment, share it. But also, if you want to be part of our podcast, all you have to do is leave a comment and tell us what you want to talk about. Remember, this is the platform for the people, and we're here to explore those life experiences that are very unique to you and to everyone else. Don't forget to subscribe.